Welcome to the conversation at SC, held in conjunction with the World Capital Market Symposium 2015. And today we are honored to have Lance James, a global cybersecurity expert, and used to head cybersecurity at Deloitte in US. A lot has been taught about cybersecurity. Why should we be concerned about cybersecurity?
It's in everything. In a simple sense, in a very abstract way to look at it, it is literally in everything, right? From the mobile devices used today, all the way up to your securities and transactions in your banks, and down to obviously your vehicles. Everything is moving to innovation. And when we go to innovation, and we're in a time of innovation, right? We're in the information age, but it's really, like, I think, to quote earlier what I saw for at this conference, the age of disruption. As we're disrupting cybersecurity and protecting that innovation and the people that use it is paramount, right? So it's interesting because there's a paradigm where cybersecurity has become almost Hollywood, very popular, right? So people are talking about it all the time. There isn't one day you can't see in the news something about a hacker breaking into something. We've seen it, obviously. The most latest is the Ashley Madison breach, and before that, Sony, the breach, the North Korea Sony breach. We've seen retailers such as Target and Home Depot, all of these different things, and we're kind of learning a lesson with this. Is obviously, in the Office of Personnel Management, which is the Department of Secrets, basically secret clearances for the United States. We're seeing that everything is getting breached, and we're learning really quickly that maybe we're doing something wrong, or maybe we're not getting, maybe we forgot to apply what we've been trying to do for years before it was popular. The good news, the pros and cons of that. The cons are everybody's going to start reacting fearfully, and it's going to be reactive. The pros is that if we play the cards right, we're learning from this, and we will start thinking strategically when we innovate and build new things. So when we talk about, like, at a place like the World Capital Market Symposium, we talk about the bridging integration. Finance meets technology, meets crowdsourcing, meets all these new things. We've seen Bitcoin, we've seen different crowdsourcing and crowdfunding concepts. We've seen platforms and technology. We've seen stock market trading systems. When all of them converge, it's a good thing. It's a great thing. I mean, we're moving so fast. It's kind of, worst case, cybersecurity shouldn't slow us down, but it might, and maybe it should a little bit, so that we build it part of the foundation of all the new technologies we bring in. So there's a big message. On one side of it, the media is, making it very out there. But on the other side, it's finally, people like me have been trying to talk about it for years, being unheard or no one really listening. And we've had to use the media to get people to make stories. Now it's kind of carrying on its own. So I think hopefully if we don't land on our faces with it and we pick ourselves up and say, okay, we've gotten these problems, we've gotten breached. Now it's time to start figuring out, asking the right questions. How do we fix this? How do we start building security within our innovations from the ground up? We might be able to get ahead.
So is it possible to protect ourselves from cyber attacks?
Loaded question, but yes, it is. It really comes down to this. The issue isn't computers. The computers doing just fine on their own. The issues are us, right? The question is that we're asking the right questions. Is it possible? What's causing this? But we're also sometimes afraid of the answer. And the answer is that we need to step back and become accountable for what we have already done or not done. And that's a hard thing for some people to take on. For a long time, for about 10, 15 years, we would try to deny that there was breaches going on. Now it's so open, we're almost becoming complacent to it. It's kind of like a good comparison is when we, remember when we had gas prices were surging up and down, and at least from the US view when I was there, it would go from $2 to $3, and then the summer it would come down to $1.50. And you'd get kind of used to it, and then it'd go back higher and this. But the thing is, people were probably surmising that we would probably stop driving cars, but obviously we've still dealt with it, and we kept driving cars no matter how expensive it got. It worked itself out though, right? The way to start working on fixing this, though, is that to acknowledge the fact that we are, to give an analogy, the systems or the critical infrastructures and the infrastructures that are being targeted and attacked they're kind of like castles. And the castles of the old days, before, in the early times when we had castles built, they were the dominant play in warfare. They were completely, indestructible. People, arrows didn't help. Catapults didn't help. But then the invention of gunpowder came through, and it started pulverizing castles. Now the adjustment to the defensive mindset had to shift, but that was incredibly painful. It took a long time for us to shift and realize that we have to think more offensive in our defensive. We can't just stand there as castles anymore. So we're in that comparative analogy today. The cyber is the gunpowder. The packets that are sent is your gunpowder, and the organizations are the castles right now. And so we have to start shifting to thinking more offensively and more proactively to tackle this problem, which ranges all the way from the politics that are and the policies that we deal with, all the way down to the techniques we have. We may have to start applying more concepts that originated from military tradecraft than your standard physical security tradecraft, right? Techniques such as counterintelligence or tradecraft such as counterintelligence, which teach people how to investigate, reconnaissance, understand an adversary. When you look at the term counterintelligence, it is to stop an adversary from getting information. That is exactly what we're trying to do. So we need to start adapting that type of tradecraft, which involves information sharing across multiple organizations, multiple fields, multiple countries, right? We're going to have to be more transparent. We're going to have to make some sacrifices and realize what's more important to us. And our self-interests are going to have to get shared, and that's going to have to change. That's something hard to swallow for some countries, And I think that if we kind of swallow some stuff and make some of those sacrifices, I think we can make it through this.
We have some organization that had spent hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of cybersecurity defenses. Mm-hmm. Yet they are still penetrated, and some of them ended up being a very embarrassing situation. So where did they go wrong, and how can we deal with it differently? Apart from what you said just now, that we need to share more. So would it really require a cultural change in terms of how we are looking at cybersecurity?
Yes, it does. Okay, so there's three parts of business process, organizational process: people, processes, and technologies. We've invested in the technologies, but this isn't a technology problem. This is a people problem, right? We've invested in processes, but I've very rarely ever seen all three been managed properly, right? You usually have a gap in one area or another. Another thing is that you have a lot of people trying to sell technologies that aren't really the solution, right? Everybody's got their own opinion about it. A good example, remember when spam got really popular back in the early 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And at that time, there was also phishing, right? Phishing, where they were frauding banks. And everybody was coming out with technologies. And even companies like Microsoft had 6 different solutions for anti-spam, right? And some of them are adapted today. It has made a great reduction in spam, but it hasn't stopped the problem, right? But everybody had their own opinion about their anti-spam device was the best, this and that, right? Basically what's interesting about it is that we're again repeating ourselves, and companies are just trying to sell them products that solve that problem, and it's literally each time it's just like Band-Aid, 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 Band-Aid. What we need to do is go back to our basics, right? So when we look at this, we also need to hold, and we talked about accountability, we need to hold these companies accountable. Look, if I spend $100 million on my systems and something's failing, spend the $1 million to figure out what's failing. The ironic part is it's cheaper to find out what failed, but everybody wants to ignore that, right? But on the other side of it, we need to go back to the basics, right? So before we can get into this agile adversarial defense concepts like counterintelligence, we need to look at layers. Physical security, I'll give an example of this. In a physical federal building, like a government building, you have what's a common thing that when you're entering the building that always occurs? Same with airports, is you have a metal detector, right? And they check you for weapons or any kind of suspicious devices, right? You see this from the Pentagon to the airport to any of the embassies to everywhere. So even a bank, sometimes you have it depending on the bank, right? If there's high value assets and stuff. But they check that. Now, once you get inside that metal detector and you're approved, does that mean they trust you or they're going to let you just roam around without monitoring you? No, they have cameras. And they might have areas or doors that you can't go into without a key card or an access card, right? This is what's called compartmentalization, right? So when you build a federal building, there might be even a building inside of that building that only maybe federal agents or federal employees can go in, but only visitors are exposed to certain, maybe you say it's a courthouse, courtrooms or this or that, right? But there's always monitoring, there's always guards, there's always these things. Now that's counterintelligence, or that's the visibility and monitoring, the vigilance that is required. Just because I don't have a gun in the building doesn't mean I'm not dangerous to the security of the building, right? Or we can always assume maybe somehow I got past the metal detectors. So there's these layered defenses that have to happen. And then there's even a layer beyond that where if we started analyzing, for instance, the roles of somebody, like for instance, I know if I'm a federal agent, I know that I can go in this building, let's say building 1, I can go in building 2, and I can go building 3. But because I'm not a judge, right, I can't go in building 4. But if I'm a judge, I can go into building 4. This is just an analogy. Now, if I'm a hacker, say I figured out how to get through 1, 2, and 3, right? And basically, I know that if I hacked into a federal agent's computer or I'm hacked him somehow, I know that I'm going to try to go 1, 2, 3, okay, I have this access. And then suddenly I'm going to go to 4. Well, because I know that this role is a federal agent and suddenly he touches 4, I need to alert immediately on 4. Why did suddenly this federal agent go to number 4, right? So the same thing is here is once he does go to 4, I also need to trap that hacker and start making him go, okay, I'm going to let you in number 4, but this is really a fake building. We basically, when he's in there, it's locked up, he's locked inside, and we have him traveling there so we can understand what he's doing. Now, meanwhile, these are what's called like deception management protocols or honey nets or honey pots, and we have them like sitting in there. So each process, when I said 1, 2, 3, and 4, in the technological sense, that's kill chains. Like a good example would be, I put malware, I send you an email to your computer and you hit an attachment and it allows you to say, you end up hitting the attachment and it infects your computer. Okay, that your computer is infected. That's okay, right? But we know that you can't access anything with a high risk to it without certain activity. And if you do access high risk, maybe you have a cell phone that's separate that actually sends a PIN code or does out of band. So you're now minimizing that attack surface. You're basically what's called attack surface reduction. You're minimizing that. These things can be done without buying hundreds of millions of dollars of technology, right? Physical segmentation of your networks need to be treated just like if you were like building a physical building and you're compartmentalizing certain areas of the building you want certain people to have allowed to. Right? These things are, these concepts are things we talked about in the 90s, right? And no one listened to it because it was just not cost-benefit analysis for them, right? It didn't fit into their time or schedule. And ironically now, we're having to we're buying stuff that we're not even ready for. People talk about threat intelligence, right? Getting intelligence in. Well, if you can't act on it, don't get it. Right? So if you don't have an incident response team or you have a business continuity plan or you even have a way to make sure that people can't get over to these networks, don't go buying a new technology, figure out what's wrong right now. What can you do right now? So go lean, go back to kind of like a startup mindset and say, what can I do to protect what I have right now? And that's actually, I think, what we need to do is humble ourselves and stop trying to buy more stuff and work with our people more and say, if I gave you a task to secure this environment right now with all of the tools that we have, how would you do it, right? Why go buy something else when all of that stuff is available to us right now? Every system that we built is designed to be locked down. We have those things in place. We just need to basically essentially execute on those.
So you mentioned about people and the way you explain how to manage a cyber threat. It looks like you need somebody here that understands what to do and how to respond. Do you reckon that we have enough people who understands this sort of issue available in the market, and especially for countries like Malaysia in this part of the world? Do you think that we have enough maturity in terms of thinking to be able to manage some of this? Because some of the threats could originate from other markets, other jurisdictions. So you may be dealing with something that you have not seen before.
Yeah, that's true. So there is a shortage, right? And there is a There's this interesting supply and demand for security researchers, and both in the U.S., Malaysia, Singapore, all the Asia area, Australia, the Western, the UK, everything. There's a shortage of those people, and the experts that are the experts are quite not available in a lot of times, right? But that doesn't make it not trainable, right? Or we see the young kids these days; they're kind of getting into it and everything like that. It's a lot of it is just mindset, right? And you kind of have to, like for instance, some of the experts that I've seen that have actually been pretty good leaders in this is risk management concepts, right? Now in the securities world, risks are managed in a very static way, right? You know, hey, we've made this regulation, it does this, and if something does that, we say, hey, don't do it, or we catch it. In cyber threats, the threats are always moving. Your today's adversary might be very different than tomorrow's. It's constantly evolving. So it's requiring, the type of people that you need is people who love to stare at this stuff and love to study it. It's honestly constant research, right? It's what we call threat research, right? And those people have to study the new attacks. But you have to put infrastructures out there to gain insight into those new attacks before that infrastructure is you. Right, you want to obviously gain it a little bit more advanced than making your infrastructure the guinea pig, if you know what I'm saying. But on the side of the people stuff, it is trainable. I worked at Deloitte for a few years, and I trained. So we had a different division that was doing monitoring for our customers, and then I had my threat research team. Which my threat research team, to be honest, was comprised of some people that were completely very technical, and then I also hired specifically history majors, because in intelligence you need to know history. And those history majors would also they would also learn. So what I did was, to kind of fix the shortage problem, I built a mentorship program inside our team. So I'd have someone who has one skill set, and it's maybe programming and understands deep level computer stuff at a level that knows how to program securely, right? And write tools that we may need that are on a whim. I'd have a history major because I needed the strategic historical research of an adversary, right? And understand the history of maybe why China and America are having the problems they're having, things like this. Because if you know your history, you can start making, maneuvers on predictions and strategic development and intelligence, right? Then I had hunters, literally like hacker hunters. All they did was they would hunt. But each one of them would teach each other. And then we would go teach other departments that were doing the monitoring. And we would do Tuesday trainings, right? And we would go show, okay, here's how this malware is doing this, and we teach them on a threat. And they would go apply that threat, because one, when you train them and you got people monitoring stuff all day, they get bored. But when you do that, it incentivizes them to get morales up. They want to learn this stuff. People are eager to learn this stuff. This stuff's exciting, right? That's why media loves it. So we go train them every Tuesday on something, a lunch and learn, maybe 1 to 2 hours. This is how this piece of malware works. Then I found out on their own, they would go apply that and find it on our customers, our clients, they would, run it and see if they would find it on their clients. And this was really cool, because this process was basically feeding into each other. And then what it would do is it would force the other department to come over to visit our department and learn more. And they would also teach us stuff, because then we're learning what is at the client versus us in our little research pool. So then we would learn what the client's needs were. Then what you do is you build a high touch relationship, whether it's in your own organization or if you're doing client work. And you do weekly meetings with each other and say, what do you need to research or work on, or what are we facing, or what have we seen this week? And you all have transparency, so you show each other, this is what I found. And you have to humble yourself and be okay. There's no ego at the table, and you have to ask each other. It's okay to ask. There's no dumb question. It's okay to ask as you're learning. And what we try to do with this mindset was always a beginner's mind. Everybody's learning at the table. Even if you have advanced threats, expert skills sets, and history of that, we all have something to teach, and we all have something to learn. So this was kind of how I built it at Deloitte on purpose. And this was extremely effective, because then it basically kind of made a ripple effect, and other people started learning stuff and applying it. I think people will have this barrier in their mind that they think it's very hard to get into, but it's not, because it's actually more interesting than it is hard. And so I think if there's interest, I think that people will spend the time to learn.
So for that process to happen in any organization, how much commitment from the top management or even from the board is required? Because from what you explained, all these things will not happen in a short period of time, and it requires a lot of encouragement and resources. So have you seen any successful organizations where the board are committed and management are basically hands-on in?
I have. I can't name clients, of course, but because this has become a board attention-getting issue, the board is literally scared, and they're up there. And we find an interesting thing with the board versus the people like in the trenches. There's a gap of truth that disappears. The board, and like you take like someone who's like maybe reporting on like the progress. There's a fear because they go, okay, I got to go to a board and I don't want to like make them feel scared, or we try to over scare them, right? And then the board's like, what do we do? And there's a gap of misunderstanding between a board and maybe a technical person like a CISO, right? This is why I said that a CISO when I was speaking that the CISO needs to be in the board. In the boardroom with them, right? And this way that they start to learn the languages of each other, right? So this is an interesting thing. So buy-in from the board shouldn't be based on fear, but based on success and efficiency. The program I just mapped out, you can take a different topic or a different industry. It doesn't have to be cybersecurity, and you do the same thing and it will still succeed. When I did it at Deloitte, I didn't go get board approval. I went and did it. Right, and that's what you have. Sometimes you do. What do they say? Do it first and apologize later. But you're not going to have to apologize because it succeeded, right? It didn't take that much energy because mostly it can be done at the management level. Because if I'm sitting there saying my group wants to offer to teach your group for a couple hours, most of the director is going to be like, please, right? We could definitely up the skills. It's internal value upward. So it's actually an easy sell because now the board's not spending $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 for more experts, right? They're actually bringing the expertise inside at the salaries that they're already making, and over time that actually saves money in total cost of ownership, right? So I actually found that we applied this to some of our clients, and then we taught them about it, and they started doing it because it only made sense because it saves them money. It's actually you shouldn't have to spend more money on security than the problem's costing you, right? So, I try to think, when I was at Deloitte, I tried to think lean. I was joked around and said the best way to succeed at Deloitte is try to get fired. Now, what I mean by that is think like a small company, right? At small companies, you can get away with a lot of stuff because you're flexible, right? So what you do is you build a team that you encompass them around so they feel like they're working in a small company, and they become flexible in their thinking. They don't worry about it. It's my job as their leader to worry about the politics upstairs or the approvals. But basically, I'll write the justifications, but I already get it going in place. And what'll happen is people will see it happening. So when I go get to the justification to the board or my bosses, I'm like, well, this is already the metrics I have that's already happened in this. And by the way, this has helped our client. Tell any board this helped our client and they want to renew. I don't think you're going to have a problem selling it to the board. So it's really about showing it, and as long as you can build the metrics, and I promise you by doing this, it's easy to measure that because you can literally see the results. Because iterative results are more powerful than everybody trying to do something all at once, right? Everything has to be iterative. It's kind of like corporate self-awareness, right? You fix things one at a time, but at least if you make those goals to start fixing them, they do happen. And the next thing you know, it's fast. You look 6 months backwards and you're like, oh, I'm there. Oh, wow, right? So that's the approach I took. So
maybe my last question is,
sure.
When you talk about industry, we talk about capital market, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I think just now you talk about what you do in an organization,
mm-hmm.
but as you said, information need to be shared,
mm-hmm.
and some organization they may not be
right.
They may not be supportive of the idea of sharing because it will require them to admit that something happened to them. So how could we overcome this and create an environment where everybody is helping each other so that this threat is managed as an industry rather than everybody will be left on its own to manage cybersecurity issues?
So in every single industry, it's about one thing: content. No matter what, content. News, content. Stock, content. Threat intelligence, content. Information, content, right? It's all content, right? Some people's content is their intellectual property. It's their value to their company, and they believe that. But I think they're wrong. I think it's quality of content, right? But it's not necessarily just content, right? Because if you think about it, once it's out there, it's out there, right? So how you fix this problem is in some ways, there are certain things, there's some certain complications. For instance, you have non-disclosure agreements with certain companies that you do business with. You have legal, legal, the most favorite word of a lawyer is no, right? In any big business, right? Especially if you're working in finance. I mean, it makes sense. It's all about risk aversion, right? To minimize all risks, right? To fix this problem, I think you're gonna have to fix it by example, right? And I think just like we were talking about the castle and the gunpowder, there are going to be new things that have to just be tried over time, and they're going to go, okay, that worked. Or like a better one was the gas price thing. Over time, people just adjusted, right? Now, on the other side of it, there's issues and complicated issues with things such as government sharing with the private industry, right? Or multiple countries. Certain countries may not want to share with other countries. You don't have to share with everybody, but you can share with the people who need to know that can help you. And those people can be rated and reputized or reputationally scored, or they can just, when I say reputationally, maybe they've helped you in the past and that made a difference, right? It's really about trusted sharing working groups, right? And then, for instance, if you're having to share with the government, you might want to say, I'm going to anonymize this because this is this information. So we really just have to know how to structure our information that we can share what bits to who we decide to. But we need to build a platform or an environment or a methodology to actually do this proper sharing. In the intelligence industry that's not in the classified world, we have what's called the traffic light protocol. It's called TLP. And we have different colors. One's red, one is amber, one is green, and then there's white, right? Red means if I send you an email and I mark it TLP red, it means you and I can only have this email. If it's in a group, only that group can have that email. It means that it's a trusted set of groups that I believe should only handle this information because it's a need to know just for them. Now, if you wanted to go to your team and act upon it, you'd have to get permission from the person who initiated the email and possibly the other people in the group, right? So this helps with sensitivity handling of information, but we're still sharing information. If I mark it amber, it means that I can give it to you in the group, and then you can also use it wisely or like basically discretionally to your organization or team members that need to take action on it, right? Because intelligence is about action or information is about action, right? So if it's green, it means you can hand it off to any industries, but don't put it out publicly. You see this in some of the energy type of information threats that we see. In the US, we have FBI flash reports that get sent out to the industry, and a lot of them marked green, which is that a lot of people can see them, but they're not publicly available, right? And this keeps the bad guys, hopefully, from seeing it. And then there's white, which is you can do whatever you want with it, right? So we have these markings. It's kind of like a taxonomy or classification system, which is a start. Just not enough people know about them. On the information security side, no one knows about TLP, whereas the intelligence community does, right? So we're trying to use that as a standard to be able to have this information, and so that people have kind of a Chatterhouse or Chatham House rules and says don't share this outside this. If you do share it, don't. And then there's also rules like don't attribute it to us. You can share the information, just don't tell anybody we sent it to you. So really what needs to happen is it needs a platform that can actually handle this kind of information across the globe, right? And certain people can sign up, and they can sign under certain subscriptions or TLP ratings, and they can have a certain attribution. They can say, I'm in this industry, so I'm only going to get this industry information. I'm limited to this information. It's kind of like clearances, where you might have high clearance, you can have access to more information based on vetting process. So I think that's actually how we're going to have to do it. Is you don't have to hand out information to everybody. You just have to know how to build a process that gets the right information to the right people. Because you don't want too much information anyway, so, and then it just becomes another problem altogether.
So Lance, I think you have shared a lot about cybersecurity. One take-home point for me is about how people handle the issue. So it's not so much about technology, which I think a lot of people now are investing a lot of their money on that, but people needs to be aware and be responsive on issues, and I think the other point is about how we share information so that the whole industry are able to withstand this. Exactly. So with that, thank you for participating in Conversation at SC, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much.